Good evening. Welcome to another tedious version of Diatribes from the voice of Doom. Now here's your torrid and tumultuous host, voice of Doom. That is one of my favorite 20th century pieces by Krzysztof Penderecki. Recently died. And I like sound mass. I really enjoy that genre of music that was pretty popular in the 60s and 50s when composers were getting very experimental. I like Ligeti. You might know his songs from 2001, Space Odyssey, Atmospheres. And I composed a sound mass for my senior thesis, which I've never heard played and probably never will. But it sounds a lot like what you just heard. It's 33 strings, all with different parts. And they're all playing different notes at the same time. The notes don't go together particularly, but it's an interesting thing. Maybe I'll hear it one day. But I like Penderecki. That was called Victims for the Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. It was about the atomic bomb. So, a little background on that. And I was just going to finish up on stuff I said last time. Don't have a whole lot of data, just things I forgot to say. Now, we can all see that they're putting up many distractions to keep people from thinking about this pipeline business. And they're making it so that it's not a big deal, because if it was a big deal, they'd be reporting on it every day, wouldn't they? But it's not a big deal. So a major pipeline being sabotaged, we don't really care who did it, we don't want to know, and it's not a big deal. But I just think it's ironic because I've thought of things that have happened in the past that were big deals, like there was an Exxon Valdez oil tanker that split apart in the middle of, I believe, might have been Prudhoe Bay, but it was one of those. Maybe it was Valdez Bay. But in Alaska, spilling billions of tons of oil into the harbor and polluting everything around it for years. People made a big deal out of it. And they said that someone would be held accountable, and somebody was, the captain. There was a Gulf platform explosion, a few of them really, but one I remember vividly. They showed footage of oil spewing out of the earth, out of this broken pipeline for days. I mean, for like a week, they kept showing it spewing. Show how much oil was put into the sea, and people were having a cow. Now, let's talk about nuclear stuff. 3 Mile Island, that was close to a nuclear disaster, made the place uninhabitable. Chernobyl, even worse. There was an actual meltdown of the core, I believe, which they were always dreading, but it only poisoned a few 100,000 acres, miles, whatever. But the fact is people covered it, and it was a news story for days and decades. Now we have one where nobody knows what's going on. No one's interested. Petrie is doing his devastation tour to see all the mayhem and destruction that he's caused by not solving climate change already. He's had 2 years to change the climate. We still get hurricanes. So he's not doing a very good job on that. But he can tour the devastation because those are easy for people like him because he's got his prefab macros for what he's going to say. The government will do everything we can to help you. Don't worry. You know, the usual platitudes you can hear him say already. He won't know where he is half the time. He'll think he's in Puerto Rico when he's in Florida. You watch. He'll think he's still in Puerto Rico. But no real interest in who did this. Now, most of those environmental things, they got to the bottom of who was the culprit and who was culpable and who was going to be made, to account, taken to account. But apparently nobody's interested in this pipeline business. Now, I've heard some spinach. I don't know what the lefties are saying. If they're for it or against it, you'd think they'd be apoplectic because of the environment, but they're not saying anything. And some of the righties are saying things that sound very like talking points from somebody, saying Russia did it, and it's obvious Russia did it, and they're saying it over and over again. When somebody comes up with a different idea, they cut them off. Been hearing that a bit, and it's like, well, it doesn't make sense if Russia would blow up their own pipeline because they can just shut off the valves and just shut off the natural gas and hold Europe hostage. So why would they blow it up? And then the answer that I think is made up is he blew it up so that he didn't have to say that he cut off the natural gas. He wouldn't have to take responsibility for that. I think Vlad is past worrying about taking responsibility for whatever he does. He's blowing up thousands of people, innocent people at that. So he's going to worry about his image, so he blows up the pipeline instead of shutting it down, saying, I didn't do anything. Now, if that were the case, we know we have some apparatus to figure out who did what. Forensic science that they're so proud of. Come on. I mean, someone knows who did it, and they don't want to say who did it, so then we absolutely know who did it. It's obvious. I'm not going to say it again. Other distractions, Pelosi and her idiocy. Some people don't learn that you can say less. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind. I notice a lot of people do that. No matter what idiot thing comes into their head, they have to utter it out loud. And it's annoying because Pelosi is like, why would DeSantis send people north from Florida? I talked to farmers and they said we need those guys here to pick the crops. She said that out loud, thinking nothing of it. And it's absurd on many levels. First level is it's racist. It's condescending. And in the second place, I thought people weren't supposed to hire illegals. So if she says we need them in Florida to pick the crops, she is sanctioning hiring illegals, obviously. So that's going to go out the door. We're going to go right back to the way we were in the 70s and 80s when they hire illegals to do all the jobs because they take less money because they don't want to pay $15 anymore for McDonald's workers and bag boys. They don't want to do it. They don't want to pay $16. They're paying more, $17. So that's the way that's going to go. But a distraction. I think people should think about this pipeline business because the fact that nobody wants to figure out anything about it means we have a conspiracy theory on our hands. And no matter what you say will dictate how you are categorized. If you say America did it, or what used to be America, then you are a insurrectionist. who doesn't believe in America or whatever it used to be. If you are a wokester, you will say, I don't know what they would say. I don't think they're even thinking about pipelines right now. But they probably would go for rah-rah U.S. used to be A, because we would never do anything like that because we're too good. And they don't give a crap about the environment. So, I didn't have a whole lot to say today. I wanted to just wrap that up. I'll just tell you about my argument with my kid. And things are getting better. But my younger kid, Benjamin, helps me out a lot. And if it weren't for him, I never would have made it. Never. He's a godsend. He's a very good reason not to get an abortion if you have a kid like that. But he agreed to bail me out again, and then we proceeded to get into a political brouhaha just for fun. And I was saying how the electoral system was stupid and it's ridiculous because you have 50 different states with all their different rules, and you have all these different ways to vote, and getting into office is just a popularity contest where who spends the most money for publicity gets in, and then they're supposed to be the experts to solve our problems. It doesn't make sense. So I explained my idea of, having people who actually know their job, know how to do things, be in the office, and not really have this Senate and legislature BS. But we argued about that. He said, nah, that would never work. You got to have everybody be able to vote, otherwise they don't have representation. It's like if they're too stupid to vote, then they just have to go with the majority. Because most people are too stupid to vote. It's obvious. I'm too stupid to vote. And so that means most of the world is. We can't have a problem-solving organization called a so-called government made up of people that the common crowd votes for. Because it's just a matter of spending the most money to get the most exposure in the media, say a bunch of platitudes, don't debate if you think you can't win with logic, and just hope that the popularity or the fact that you have a D next to you gets you the votes. Stupid. Not going to work. You can see why. You can see what's happening. So we argued about that, and then I made some mention about how Orangey was probably the best president we've had since George Washington. He said, well, if you were so good, how come they had the riots? And I said he wanted to send in the National Guard, and the governors wouldn't let him. And he's like, he can send in the National Guard if it's a rebellion or civil disorder. And I said no, and we argued about it. I got out my Constitution, looked up Article 1, Section 9, that's habeas corpus, but there's some Insurrection Act of 1807. Yeah, he can call in the National Guard with the permission of the governors who didn't give him permission. And that was my argument to him. He said, well, you could do it anyway. You can just do it because there's civil disorder. Send them anyway. And I'm like, you can't do that. And then he gets blamed for the riots. So we argued about that. It was just a little appendix to nothing. But that's what my one kid and I do. We argue about politics, and we're reasonably well versed. I worry about the rest of the country, especially when I look at TikTok and realize these people are of voting age. This cannot bode well. But I'll leave it at that. I said nothing, and hopefully it was entertaining in a way. I just wanted to do a diatribe. Thanks for putting up with me.